From Autosport.com and Autosport Magazine, I'm Kevin Turner, and this is the Autosport F1 race review. Well, it started, finally. We've got the 2026 F1 season. All the new rules and teams, driver combinations have kicked off in Melbourne. Before we get into it, I'm going to introduce my guest to talk us through quite a dramatic weekend. Jake Boxall-Legge, what are your first impressions of the new era?
I was quite impressed, actually, to be honest with you. I thought, there's been so much doom and gloom about the new regulations, and I just thought, actually, the race has been all right, hasn't it? I'm sure people will find a way to spin it into something that they didn't enjoy it because of X, Y, and Z. But if you take it at face value, I would say out of all the Australian Grand Prix we've ever had at Albert Park, it was, somewhere sort of the sort of mid-top end, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But before we get into the sort of the nuts and bolts of it, let's just kind of go over the results, which I'm sure people are familiar with by now. So it's a Mercedes 1-2, George Russell leading Kimi Antonelli by just under 3 seconds. Then the two Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. Lando Norris, the reigning world champion, he was pretty downbeat after, wasn't he? Fifth in the only McLaren that made the start. Max Verstappen in 6th. Ollie Behrman a fine 7th for Haas. 8th was rookie Arvid Lindblad for Racing Bulls. A good weekend from him. Gabriel Bortoletto 9th Audi, points on their debut. Pierre Gasly doing the thing he seems to do, which is just about getting Alpine into the points in 10th. Esteban Ocon was 11th from Alexander Albon in the Williams. Disappointing weekend for them. Liam Lawson 13th in the second Racing Bulls. Franco Colapinto 14th in the other Alpine. Carlos Sainz 15th in the second Williams, and Sergio Perez getting Cadillac a finish on its Formula 1 World Championship debut as well. And then the non-finishers, as we expected, really, the two Aston Martins, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso. Valtteri Bottas's Cadillac broke down, as did Isaac Hadjar's Red Bull. We'll talk about him later on. Nico Hülkenberg and Oscar Piastri didn't get to make the start. Well, before we talk about some of the more interesting storylines of that, let's hear from Stuart Codling, who was out in Melbourne.
Well, good evening from the Albert Park paddock. Quite an eventful weekend so far, and a mixed debut for the 2026 Formula 1 regulations. It's been sort of like a weird up and down weekend in terms of public perception of them, in terms of the way the media has been reflecting on the changes and kind of the way the drivers have been talking about them as well. So there's been quite a lot of negativity in the room, and I'm sure probably seen a bit of negative commentary in the press. Certainly after qualifying, and from my point of view, watching trackside, my opinion changed throughout the weekend. So first practice, I went to turns 1, 2, 3, and to my mind, the cars looked fine, and actually an improvement on the ground effect cars. They looked lighter, a little bit more agile. They looked fast, looked fine. Then when I went out on the other side of the track to turn 9, you'd kind of get this weird sort of absurd scenario where they were lifting and coasting and super clipping, and that I think was a little bit more tricky for the casual fan to decipher. And when you looked at the onboards, it looked a bit weak as well. So I can see why there was some negativity then. So, what happened in the race? Certainly the opening laps, it was all quite harem-scarum. And what was interesting for me was the way the energy really changed in the press room. Everyone was really excited, and just in terms of the way I usually take notes during a race, there's always someone walking past with some sort of magician's cupboard at this time of night in the paddock. You should see over behind your shoulder, for those watching on YouTube, there's someone handcuffed to a chair and police attendants, which is quite interesting. That's not germane to the story right now. But yeah, harem-scarum start to the race and opening few laps. People were reacting to it. They were really enjoying it. And it felt like a lot of that negativity was being dispelled. And then that's kind of seeped away. And at the end of the race, we were talking to the drivers in the paddock. There was an awful lot of negativity still. Not so much from the people at the front, but drivers further back were not very impressed with what they described as sketchy opening laps, certainly the run to the start. Some people had come to the grid and found that they had no battery. Max Verstappen, Isaac Hadjar, just to name a couple. George Russell said he had no battery. And that made for a very unpredictable start. And if you kind of dig down into the detail of the race, Liam Lawson really bogged down at the start, struggled to get away, was very nearly hit by Franco Colapinto, and it was only because of Colapinto's lightning reflexes that he managed to dodge between the Racing Bulls car and the pit wall, and that could have been quite nasty. Lando Norris was quite outspoken after the race and said he was quite surprised that no cars ended up going over the wall. When I said to Pierre Gasly, about the opening few laps of the race being a little bit tasty, he said, well, it might have looked entertaining, but we're the best 22 drivers in the world, so we're able to sort of contain it, but it might not stay that way. So yeah, certainly a lot to unpack from that race. What else is on the news agenda? Well, have all the Mercedes engine cars got a level playing field? That's something that probably we need to unpack over the following days and weeks. There's mixed opinions among the Mercedes customers who feel that they understand why the Mercedes Works team had a better spec in Bahrain testing. That's in their gift. But there's sort of a feeling that maybe Mercedes aren't being quite as cooperative with customers as perhaps they could be in terms of helping them out with, well, I don't even know what they actually should be feeling they need help with, but certainly the Mercedes customers are feeling that they're learning a lot about how Mercedes have developed an understanding of their power unit package by just watching the Mercedes as it goes around the lap. So they're constantly waiting for qualifying to happen so that they can run in the same conditions as Mercedes and kind of work out where they should be. So yeah, it's certainly going to be very interesting going into China. I've probably run far over my 7 to 10 minute allocation for jibber jabbering in the paddock. So I'll sign off. I hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast, and let's find out who this person's been handcuffed for.
Well, thanks to Stuart. We still haven't managed to work out who was handcuffed to the chair. If you know, let us know. That's a very typical Stuart there, really picking on the detail that we didn't ask for, and we don't know the answer to it. But anyway, yeah, let us know if you were handcuffed at the Australian Grand Prix. Let us know why. Hope you're out. I think depends what you did, I suppose.
With this lighting here, I mean, it could be one of us, to be honest.
No, I'm afraid I didn't. I can't get back from Australia that fast. Right, well, let's get on to the race properly. So let's look at the race overall before we get into the teams. You said it already. I thought it was quite good. Are we allowed to say that? Is that all right?
I don't know.
I think we're okay.
People watching.
So the first few laps were great, weren't they? We had George Russell and Charles Leclerc actually passing and repassing each other for the lead. And I know that there was a discussion that the overtakes would be too easy because of the energy. They didn't look easy. They were just in different places. No one could get the advantage. And I thought that was okay.
Yeah, I mean, that was trailed before the season. Like, obviously, people were going to have different methods of deployment because everyone's still feeling out these cars. They're still trying to work out what the best way to run them is. So it made total sense that was the case. But it was nice to kind of see that. Like last year, for example, I don't think we would have really seen that at all because it was very much as you were in qualifying and whoever led into turn one got it. So it was actually kind of refreshing in that sense. So I'm not entirely sure why people kind of want to take maybe a slightly more puritanical view of, well, I'd rather have something a little bit more real than that. It's like, well, you kind of had that last year and it wasn't very interesting. But yeah, I think it was a really good cat and mouse battle between them. I think Leclerc's kind of won out before the virtual safety car happened.
Slightly surprisingly, I would think, from pre-season testing.
I think, obviously, we knew that Ferrari was going to be really, really strong at the start. And it's that smaller turbo, much less inertia in getting that spooled up. So they were at full torque a lot quicker. And Leclerc said he didn't even actually get that good of a start. So it was just everybody else kind of maybe made a bit of a mess of it, or it's still early days with these cars. They've not actually done that many starts. The procedure is new. And I think for a lot of people as well, watching that pre-start procedure would have been the first time they'd seen it if they'd not watched testing. Did you notice it? Because it's not really...
Only the extra bit on the gantry.
Yeah, it's barely perceptible.
Yeah. We should probably say that some of the cars came to the grid, including the Mercedes, with no battery charge. So do you want to talk us through how there's a bit of a compromise to be made, isn't there, on the way to the grid?
Yes, because because everything's new, everybody's trying to sort of work out the best way to do things. And so you have this kind of diametrically opposed forces of needing to warm up your tyres, but also need to charge the battery. and you spend battery to warm up the tyres, and if you're charging your battery, then the tyres are getting cold because you're stopping for corners a lot earlier. You're not getting the kind of lateral load into the car. So it's really, really difficult to balance the two things up, and especially when you get to a point when because actually you can charge the battery relatively quickly. Like, I'm sure
it was building up quite quickly in the braking zones. You could see on the graphic.
On those rare occasions you saw the TV graphic, it does go up quite quickly. But then you usually do 2 burnouts on the grid, and so you're just going to spend a load of battery doing that. And if you've not gone through the final 2 corners at a certain pace, then you're just not going to get the battery in there. So yeah, you had the 2 at the front. I think George and Kimi didn't have much battery, if any at all. I think Leclerc had about 20%, I think he said, in the cool down room, and that was good for him. But then there were a few more that didn't as well, as Cod has already said. So again, it's something else to get used to. I think teams just sort of trying to work things out.
Well, they're still learning, aren't they? I mean, one point about you mentioned it about the artificialness of it. I consider myself quite a purist, as you know me well.
Yeah, of course.
To me, this seems it's better than DRS, where one car has an advantage over the other just by being behind it. This, at least they're playing with the same. They've got the same resources. It's just a matter of whether you use it on that straight or the next straight. So in a way, I find that I found the racing less artificial that way than when one car can just ping the wheel, pull over, and go past. Like Leclerc and Hamilton look like, Leclerc and Russell looked like they were actually racing each other in those first few laps, which I enjoyed. People, we want lighter cars, we got those. We want them to move around and not be ground effects cars, we got that. We wanted some overtaking, we got that. Everyone thought the cars were going to break down. They didn't really. I've looked up the stats. We've got 16 finishes from the 22 this time. In 2014, when the hybrid engines came in, there were only 13 finishes. The winning margin was 26.77 seconds. Nico Rosberg won by in the Mercedes that time. Charles Leclerc was within 15 seconds of the Mercedes in this time, and we'll get on to they could have been closer. So overall, I was quite pleasantly surprised. But we should probably cover off that the front runners quite enjoyed it. The midfield runners, not quite so much. And there were a few scary moments, weren't there?
Yeah, I think the main one that jumps out is Liam Lawson got very bogged down at the start. And, well, as Cod has said, Colapinto had to take evasive action. But you have this sort of weird situation where, again, and you've mentioned this about overtaking as well, it's you have a certain amount of battery life per lap, and if you have overtake, you do get half a megajoule, a bit more. But even then, you're still spending more. So if you're in overtake mode, you still have to work out whether you want to spend that or not. And everyone has the same per lap, and it's all about what you do with it. So again, you have the same resources. It's not like one car has too much of an inherent advantage over the other. But you have to pick at what points you charge, and unfortunately, at the moment, because efficiency maybe isn't where it needs to be, your systems aren't where it needs to be, you do see a little bit more lifting coast or a little bit more super clip, and that does create a speed differential. And we didn't see it too much in Melbourne, but I think the main area of consternation was that run out of turn 8 along Lakeside Drive and then into turn 9, 10. That was because that's a little bit blind on the inside. So if a car is on the inside line and slow, you risk having an accident there. Equally, and this was also talked about pre-round as well, which was the restrictions on active aero. They were thinking of taking that away for that particular section of the circuit because obviously when you have active aero, you don't have the downforce, and particularly around the front end, the drivers were finding the front end very, very nervous through that set of corners. And then on the approach to turn 9 as well, obviously the wing kind of springs back up again. And I think it was Audi that had made the biggest kind of overtures to kind of get that active aero area removed rather, and all the other teams were like, no, we want it to stay the same. And that's what caused the sort of hoo-ha on the Saturday morning. So yeah, it was a few leery moments, a few scary moments, and a few aspects that maybe you kind of have to think, okay, how do we stop this becoming an issue later? And I think it's good that they're thinking about it, but at the same time, you don't necessarily you're going to have those moments until you have them. And so to have some kind of indication of that, rather have it now and have nothing bad happen and maybe tweak a few things, than not expect it at all.
I mean, if it's a safety issue, obviously, because several of the drivers did say it was a bit like, Max Verstappen said the FIA should look into it. How much do you think it is a fundamental problem with the regulations, and how much of it is you think cars slow off the line anyway? Sometimes it doesn't have to just be the electrical deployment. And how much is it the team still getting used to it? I mean, George Russell made the point, it's the first race, it's probably one of the worst tracks for this, and we're all learning. So will we get 3 or 4 races down the line and everyone's like, well, there's hardly any problem now because we all know what we're doing. We're all using the energy in the same sort of places, which probably make the races less interesting but safer. And how much of it is do you think, oh no, actually, they probably do need to take it as a serious safety issue?
Well, if you look back at 2001, for example, when they brought allowed launch control, I think, from the Spanish Grand Prix. I think there were 4 cars that stalled that day.
Yes, didn't move.
And stalling cars is going to be an issue. And obviously you don't have launch control and things like that anymore. But it is always a possibility that you bog down or something like that. So yes, it is a safety issue. And yes, it's something that, that can be mitigated. But it's not like it's a new thing. And I sort of think that, yes, again, there are safety issues and the closing speeds into corners. That can go either way. Some people think it is a safety issue, others think it isn't. I remember during pre-season testing, it was something that Andrea Stella said was a safety issue and he wanted to get looked at. We asked Hayao Komatsu the same question. He was like, I don't think that is a safety issue. It's just that's something that happens and has happened through all of Formula One. You have one car that is in front and maybe slower than the other. Maybe the closing speeds are slightly different now, but when you were coming up behind a Life or a Cologne in the 1990s, maybe you didn't think it was so much of a safety issue. But I
guess it's the predictability, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess less predictable as to who's going to be quick where, whereas back in the 80s, you knew a brand BMW on full boost was going to be coming up at a Tyrrell, Cosworth, that's a rate of knots.
But I think there is a tendency, and we've also seen a lot of this in the preseason, we want to weaponize it. And I don't like that. I don't like how cynical that is. I don't like that teams go, oh yeah, it's a safety issue, but they will get something performance. And I know that
it's a tactic.
I know that it's a part of Formula One, and I know that the political aspect of that. It's a highly charged environment, but I sort of feel like it's become a little bit more. What's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more sinister, almost.
Well, I'm sure this will be a discussion that comes up as the season goes, or maybe it will get less. It'd be interesting to see if all the teams get on top of it and the speed differential is less because they're all doing the same thing. It might be one of those things that kind of peters out, but we'll have to follow that. Well, let's get on to the pecking order because that's one of the reasons you tune in at 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, you had to for your job, obviously. But,
yes, of course.
And so Mercedes did win off of 1-2 and finished 1-2, which we expected, but it perhaps wasn't quite as easy as we thought. Maybe one area that was a little bit concerning for some of the other teams, McLaren in particular, was how far they were off the Works team. So obviously Stuart mentioned there from the paddock there's a little bit of unrest about that. Is that to be expected? Do we think this is always going to happen if Mercedes rock up? I don't remember it being a thing in 2014 though.
No, but in 2014 there were clear and defined regulations where you could have a sort of customer spec, if you like.
Didn't have to be the same, whereas they do now.
It was I think it was after 2017 and 2018 that it was changed. They do have to be, hardware-wise, they do have to be the same spec and they do have to receive the same amount of support. But the difference there is that Mercedes had used a different spec of powertrain in testing, which is outside the bounds of that. And the other teams had used a slightly older spec. And I think Mercedes was trialling, let's say, a better spec, the final specification of power unit. That's why they probably had a little bit more unreliability than they did in Barcelona, and trying to sort of get on top of that. So I think it's sort of very much the case of, oh yeah, no, we'll try that out and see if it works, and you can have it back, you can have it later. I think there's an element of that with the kind of software aspect of that as well, where they're getting the, let's say, more extreme end of it, trialing it out, and because they don't necessarily want to give that to a customer, because obviously if it doesn't work for the customer, then they're going to kick off.
It sounds a bit like the old Porsche Group C thing. Well, we'll try the latest Bosch Motronic electronic unit on the turbo first, or we're going to do the bigger engine. We'll make sure it's all right before we give it to you. It always meant they had an advantage if they got it right. Unless, of course, you did the Yoast thing and go and do your own thing and beat them anyway. So there's that. But I mean, does this give some of the Mercedes teams, particularly McLaren, I suppose, are coming off a double world championship, is that a fairly low-hanging fruit then for them to catch up? Some of the gap they're off is they just need to be more familiar with the hardware and have that bit more time with it and see what Mercedes are doing. So they should get closer quicker.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is something that James Vowles said might actually be worth about 0.3 of a second. So when you're looking at the gap that Mercedes had, it doesn't make up for all of it, but just using the powertrain more effectively, getting access to those software work modes and working out how they deploy and how they do all of the different bits and pieces. I think part of it is as well the teams looking at that data and going, oh, okay, that's how you use it. Okay, right, we'll do that as well. And so, McLaren and Williams and now Alpine will have access to that. But I think, yeah, it lends credence to, yes, there is sort of like a downside to being a customer as well. It can't just sort of all be you pay less and you get a good engine out of it. Like there's still a works team in charge of it.
Yeah, and we should say though that Lando Norris actually looked a lot quicker at the end than he did at the beginning. First 2/3, 3/4 of the race, a bit. That last when Max Verstappen was cruising up behind him, I thought, well, Max is going to be fifth here. And then Norris was able to fend him off up the pace, and at one stage was lapping on roughly the same pace as the leaders suddenly, having been a second a lap off. So they were still, he said afterwards, they were still making tweaks, they're still learning. So there's a lot of, this isn't the final pecking order, is it, basically, after one race?
I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see that, especially in the first half of the season. We're going to go to a new track, and it's going to be the case that, we'll probably see this in China as well, nobody's going to really know what to do, and they'll do the sprint race, but it still won't provide them the full picture. So you're going to have sort of like a slightly crazy first half of the race, and then what we would call a more normal F1 race in the second half. I don't think, because, you see some comments online, it's like, oh, they'll have it all sussed out and the races will be boring after that. I don't see that. I still think that there's enough circuits to throw a curveball.
Throughout the season?
Throughout the season, I think so. Because you're going to get different kinds, because, again, and this is the interesting thing about these powertrains is Australia is one of the more extreme examples, and there'll be circuits like maybe Jeddah, Barcelona's sort of a little bit tough, and you'll have a few others, Las Vegas as well, but hopefully by Las Vegas people have sussed it out, where they are going to be struggling a little bit for energy, and there is going to be a little bit more lift and ghost or super clip or whatever mechanism they've come up with by the time we get to that race later in the season. But you're going to get to circuits like Monaco and Singapore where it's just not going to be an issue whatsoever. We won't be talking about deployment or harvesting or anything like that, because it will just be completely natural. It will just happen. And
right, well, let's take a definite positive in the weekend, which is Ferrari are good. Right, Ferrari were close, gave Mercedes a good run. There's a few things to talk about their race. First of all, they were actually quickest through the corners, weren't they? So can we say Charles Leclerc pole and win at Monaco? Can we say that at this point?
I think it did look good. I think it was particularly the corners in Australia. It's all largely medium speed. So I'm not going to jump on the Monaco bandwagon just yet. But I think it looked very, very good. It looked very, very stable. Watching the car from trackside in Bahrain, the rear end did look a little bit loose. So it looks like they've tidied that up a little bit. It looks like a much tidier car to drive. It looks like a car that Lewis Hamilton can drive.
Well, that was one of my other points.
Yeah.
We suddenly felt we got a little bit of a glimpse of old Hamilton taking 6 seconds out on Charles Leclerc in the second half of the race on the same strategy. You kind of think, oh, hello. Is he back? Well, I guess it's too early to say, isn't it? But he looks a much happier Lewis Hamilton than we've seen for quite a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's been interesting is you had that pre-season testing, Mercedes praising Red Bull for its deployment to try and sort of move some of the attention away from the compression ratio saga and that kind of thing. Ferrari was just sort of quietly getting on with its own business. And I think it's produced a pretty tidy power unit. The car looks good. It's just sort of been encouraging. And we've not said that a lot about Ferrari. But Ferrari does sort of seem to have a good year, off year, decent year, off year. So I think like 22 started off well. 23 was a bit off the boil. 24 was good. 25 was a bit rubbish. 26 is good. They need to make the most of it now.
I think 22 is the closest parallel, isn't it? Because that became a development race, didn't it?
Yeah.
And they lost to Red Bull. So it'd be interesting to see if Ferrari can keep this momentum and keep snapping at Mercedes' heels and maybe even get ahead of them in certain places. But I guess one thing we have to talk about for this race in particular, I know you've written about this on Autosport.com, it was one of the key things you had to look at after the race. Did they make a strategy misstep by not bringing either car in during the first virtual safety car period, which is obviously when Mercedes brought both George Russell and Kimi Antonelli in, when at that point the four cars essentially running together?
I think, to be honest, I think if they brought Charles Leclerc in with Russell and Antonelli, I think the worst thing they would have done is got third in any case. I think the best they could have done, they could have potentially won. I don't think the chances were particularly high because I think I think Russell would have eventually got him. But I think he could have finished second. And when you look at, as I wrote in the piece, so you lose about 11 seconds for pitting under green flag conditions rather than virtual safety car conditions. Russell made up another 7 seconds just through the tyre offset. So once he pitted, caught up to Leclerc by 7 seconds before Leclerc pitted. So it was, I think it's a difficult one because again, you just sort of have to make a decision and you have to stick with it. I think they did pit Leclerc. I think Hamilton was right, but I think he shouldn't have been the one he should have been the one that was left out. I think.
Okay.
Because I don't think that he would have, because he was running behind Russell at that point. So I think he wouldn't have, doing the same as Russell, I don't think he would have won it, but I think Leclerc probably had the better chance to do it and either stay out in front, or at the very least stay out in front of Antonelli. So I think, if they split, they bring Leclerc in with Russell and Antonelli, that 18 seconds that Russell gains through pitting early, that's not there. So I think he's in the mix. Given that he finished 15 seconds.
Although you'd have to factor in, because you've looked at the lap time comparison between Leclerc and Russell, and it's basically the same over 30 odd laps. Obviously, that's less likely to have been the case if he'd come in early, and therefore he'd have been managing the tyre as much as Russell. So you'd expect Russell to maybe edge ahead then. Potentially on that. So we still think that Russell would probably have won, but Ferrari took away the possibility of that, I suppose.
And it depends, because again, I don't think to Ferrari's credit, I don't think they knew that the hard tyre was going to last that long.
They were expecting Mercedes to stop again, weren't they?
It's funny because we've had years of complaints about tyre wear and that sort of thing. F1 fans have got their wish. We've not spoken once about tyre wear or anything like that. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? But I think they lasted. Actually, I think Leclerc pushed Russell along a little bit more. Because I think Russell probably wanted to sit in the 123s. Leclerc pushed him into the 22s. They were in that stint, so the last 31 laps of the race, almost exactly beat for beat the same.
So within thousands, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Between their last 30 laps, Leclerc was 0.03 seconds quicker.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it gives us hope for the season that it's not just going to be weekend after weekend of Mercedes running away. I mean, Kimi Antonelli, despite quite a traumatic run into qualifying and then a terrible start, still finished within 3 seconds. So, okay, I don't know how much George is kind of managing it towards the end, but he could be maybe more of a threat than we thought as well. So reasons to be cheerful in terms of the competitive order, and throwing into that someone we haven't talked about, which we should do, Isaac Hadjar looking like a competitive proposition in the second Red Bull, which is the first time we've been able to say that for some time. I don't think it's just him. I think it's partly the nature of the cars, of course, have come along at the right time, but encouraging for him as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was really impressed with him in qualifying. He's quick, he's just quick. He's just incredibly quick. He gets very, very annoyed with himself. He doesn't just get absolutely everything out of the car. And I think he did. I think he wrestled that Red Bull around. I think he's got his head around the deployment aspect of it. He couldn't really use it because I think the powertrain was a bit crocked before he got to the grid. And so he was suffering in those opening laps. I think he'd sort of seemed to lock down fourth, but then it just got to a point where he was just no longer able to attack the cars ahead. He had Norris for company. It was just getting a little bit more difficult, and then obviously everything sort of went bang. And
I think we should give Red Bull powertrain / Ford a bit of credit though. Finishing sixth with Max Verstappen. Hadjar was running in the top four. Let's say you'd have finished fifth maybe at worst. Do you think? Probably between that front four and that gap back to the Norris.
Yeah, thereabouts, I think.
So I think a fair play, and of course, the other positive from the Red Bull side is their only kind of their next junior along the rank, Lindblad, looked amazing all weekend. I think the only thing he did all weekend wrong was he got out qualified by Lawson at the very end of Q3, having outpaced him all the way through. But I mean, he put that right in the race, didn't he? He looked like he belonged in F1 immediately.
Yeah, I think looking at Lindblad's lap time in Q3, like he wasn't, because it was slower than what he'd done before. So obviously something had gone awry, because Racing Bulls only did one run as well. So it was then or never, and turns out it was never. But yeah, I think he showed up really well. He looked like a bright spark. He looked like he had that kind of dynamism.
Yeah.
Particularly at the start, he just got those lines right. It was really impressive to watch. Obviously, I know Lawson had the problem with the bog down and everything like that, but I think he needs to have a look
under pressure, isn't he?
Yeah, that's just not going to be an ideal situation for him, that he's now the kind of guy who's charged with leading that team, and he gets beaten first weekend in. Yeah,
we'll have to see how that develops. So from a rookie driver, the one rookie driver we've got on the grid, to two rookie teams, Audi and Cadillac, and you could say they kind of both achieved their goals probably. I mean, I think probably points for Audi is more than... I mean, your pecking order from testing was pretty good, I have to say, but you had Audi 9th, and they actually finished in 9th, so that was a pleasant surprise. Car looked quite good.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason they were 9th in that pecking order is because there was a bit of uncertainty, and when I looked at the race run times, they were sort of around Williams Racing Bulls level, and Racing Bulls hadn't set as competitive a long run as Alpine, and that's basically the sort of cut and thrust of it. As it turned out, Alpine is good in the races but not very good in qualifying, so that moves them back a little bit. Whereas Audi seems to have just sort of found this progression. And we're talking about cornering speeds for the Ferraris. The Audi looked really good in there as well. They were sort of up. They were up there. They were ahead of the rest of the midfield in terms of apex speeds. I think the power unit's a little bit underpowered, which is fine because it's their first attempts. Whereas Red Bull Powertrains has gone for this approach of getting a load of F1 people from Mercedes and Renault and Honda as well, and sort of club them together into basically what is a super group of powertrain engineers. Audi sort of come at it from its own way, and it's a lot of LMP1 and engineers and who have done.
And let's face it, those LMP1 cars were sophisticated pieces of kit. Yeah. This is pre-hypercar. So they're already at a high level set of end. I quite like the fact that they've gone down their own.
Yeah,
I'm pleased that it's come out well so far.
Yeah, they've done really, really well. And I think the only sort of blot on the copybook was the issues that Hülkenberg had, which was he had no pit car telemetry. So the team would have no idea what he was doing out on track. So ultimately they had to make the decision to retire him, which is a bit rubbish that Nico goes all the way from his home to Australia and doesn't start the race. I always sort of felt a bit bad for drivers that had that over the years. Like I think 2015 when there was about 3 drivers at DNS, I always felt a bit bad for them.
Yeah, did not starting is not good, is it? But let's look at Cadillac then as the last. Yeah, well they were literally last, but Sergio Perez got his car home in 16th. So a finish. Do you think they'll be sort of fairly happy with that? That's the first box ticked, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's they've got a race finish, which is what they wanted to do, and they've done that. And I sort of heard, because what I found sort of interesting was the 2 different approaches of Bottas and Perez. And I think Bottas is sort of, he feels like he's more along for the ride. Like he sort of accepts, he knows what a new team's going to be like. And he was like, yeah, really good job, guys. Perez on the radio after qualifying, he's like, right, okay, now we need to find a performance. It was like, all right, hold your horses, buddy. Like, it's a completely new team. Yes, they are lacking downforce. We were talking about the apex speeds. Cadillac was way down on everybody else. But, what do you expect when you don't have any kind of frame of reference? So obviously one of the cars works. They just need to make sure that both cars are reliable. I think it was like a steering wheel issue, and then that was a few electronic issues for Bottas, which is why he retired. But ultimately it's just, trying to get this new team working, and then you can start to test the development side of that a little bit later into the season. But it's still an extended test session at the moment.
Now, talking of extended test sessions, it wasn't even extended for Aston Martin, was it? I mean, we've got to talk about the Aston Martin Honda. I mean, we knew they were in trouble before the weekend. It seemed to get it got worse to start with because they got down to the last 2 batteries before they even got to qualifying. We knew they weren't going to finish the race. But then a little glimmer of Fernando Alonso magic suddenly up in 10th from nowhere, just briefly, before obviously both cars retired. So where from here? I mean, it can only get better, surely.
Yeah, I think progress was made over the weekend. Like, we'd gone from the point of after FP1, 2 of the batteries were just, took 4 batteries to Australia, and then after FP1, 2 were gone. So they only had 2 more for the weekend. So it was basically, how much can they do? How much running can they do? Lance Stroll didn't really do very much running at all until the race.
43 laps he managed in the end, although not all in one go.
Yeah. And Fernando
did 21.
Yeah, and FP3, actually, I think from a pace point of view, it was kind of encouraging. Qualifying very nearly got into Q2 before Colapinto knocked him out at the end. There are things in Melbourne that you just look at and you think, okay, actually, there's something to hang your hat on here in terms of getting things fixed. They have some data. You kind of they don't necessarily know what the issue is, but they know they don't know what the root cause of the issue is, but they know that, there's the vibration and
from
battery.
The engine. This is a Honda engine vibration.
Yeah, so the Honda engine is vibrating and it's just basically killing off the battery. And I think it's a bit of a damping issue. It's something that they need to work through. Otherwise, the chassis isn't too bad. I think it's just probably, again, it's underdeveloped and it's 4 months behind everybody else. But again, there's some pace in it.
So we think they'll certainly be moving forward. I mean, one thing that we should point out, and actually Ron Vording has written about this in Autosport.com, is that Aston Martin weren't quite aware, apparently, when they did the deal with Honda, to how many of the people from the Red Bull Honda era had moved on elsewhere, either in the business or to other businesses, that they were getting a new set of engineers, which is why it's effectively not the old lot, it's the new lot. How much sympathy should we have for Aston Martin? Is that not doing your due diligence? Is that on Honda? I mean, historically, Honda have done that. That is quite a known culture within Honda, that they use F1 to bring engineers through and send them on to other parts of the business or elsewhere. So it shouldn't really have been a surprise, should it?
What I find really strange about it is that Honda was still with Red Bull when obviously that had happened. Newey must have known about that, surely. Like, unless they were completely unprivy to the project. Yeah, unless there was that degree of separation. Like, surely he must have sort of known about that, given that he was still at Red Bull at the time. So it's really it's strange. And as you say, Honda have been doing that for years, and it is a little bit like when they came into Formula One the second time in the 80s, where they've not had a UK base, because obviously that's now transferred to Red Bull or whatever. So they're trying to have to make one. And it reminds me of a story that Stefan Johansson once told me when Honda came into F1 the second time with Spirit. They didn't have a UK base, so they rented out a house in, I think, Guildford. And you had engineers servicing the engines in the kitchen. So
brilliant.
Yeah, it's not quite as tin pot as that, but
it does show how they build up, because that ultimately ended up being one of the most successful engine programs in F1 history. Yeah. And similarly, they came in with obviously McLaren Honda again in the turbo hybrid era, and that looked terrible, but they got there. So Honda do have a record of getting there in the end through with bringing these engineers through. So I guess Aston Martin have to be patient. I suppose the one person that can't really afford to be patient is poor old Fernando Alonso, because how much longer can he wait for a competitive car?
It's interesting. I sort of feel like Honda sort of enjoys the struggle of
the technical challenge. Yeah.
Because they've been through it, like when they came through in. I mean, 65 was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean that started bad and became a race-winning engine as well. But.
And then the one in 84, they started small, and then when they put the Honda in the back of the Williams, it was twisting itself to smithereens and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think they enjoy the challenge, and when it gets good, they get bored.
Blimey, there you go. Well, let's hope it doesn't take them too long, because obviously we do want as many competitive cars as possible, but probably not a quick fix at this point. Right, well, before we finish, let's just go to China. Two things there. A sprint race seems a bit early to have a sprint. Now, you can look at this two ways. It's way too early for the engineers to have, and drivers and teams to have a sprint race, or for the fans, it could be, oh yeah, this is going to be a sprint race when they still don't know what's going on. So, where do you sit on that? Are you looking forward to the sprint?
Yes, because it's going to catch everybody on the hop.
Could be a crazy race.
Yeah, it's going to be, because they've got an hour to work out where to use their energy. And I suspect that obviously everybody's going to try and use it on the back straight. And
well, it's a long straight, isn't it?
It is a long straight.
We could have some super clipping or whatever we're calling it this week.
It will
quite
clip,
early. If
it
you
will
get it
clip
wrong.
a lot, but I think that's the only place you're really going to see that. I think everywhere else it will sort of be pretty self-contained and it'll be pretty all right. But I think it might be a case of, if you want to deploy elsewhere around the lap, where do you put it? Because then you might see more cars overtaking through turns 7 and 8 and that sort of thing. It might be quite fun.
Excellent. And do we think the Ferrari can, knowing what we know about the car, do we think Ferrari can give Mercedes a run there?
I think so. I think it should be. The struggle was for Ferrari over the weekend was, because obviously they can nullify qualifying essentially by getting a good start, but obviously they want to start a little bit further up, right? So I think they just need to, when circuit temperature drops or that sort of thing, they just need to sort of build up and go with that, because obviously I think they plateaued a little bit before, well, plateaued in Q3. So if they can sort that out, they'll be up there.
Yeah, well, that's looking forward to it this weekend. Not long to wait. Well, thank you very much to Jake Boxall-Legge. Thank you very much to Stuart Codling out in Melbourne. I imagine he's probably flying back by now, hopefully. And thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back soon with another Autosport F1 race review.